joined now by someone who is perhaps best known for his producing work on both Eastenders and The Bill, but he's worked on many other well-known series, such as House of Cards and the final series of Tenko. But actually, his encounter with Doctor Who was fairly early on in his career. So I would like to introduce Assistant Floor Manager Nigel Taylor. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Yes, enjoying this lockdown immensely.
Oh, so you've been managing to keep yourself busy during this?
Yeah, actually, I have been quite. I mean, not much difference really for us. We're retired. We're just enjoying. Or we used to enjoy going to the pub, but I mean that's been severely reduced.
Yes. Oh well, we just have to hope these things come back sooner rather than later. So it feels like it's been a while anyway.
Yeah, and actually, looking back on those early days you were talking about, 1978 Doctor Who. It does seem an awful long time ago, but the more you think about it, the more bits and pieces come back to you. So yeah, we go right back to 1978.
Of course, and at that point you were an assistant floor manager. What does that job involve? I appreciate it's an outdated term now.
Yeah, completely outdated now. Well, it came about, as you probably know, from the theatre. Assistant stage managers, when television drama began, the assistant stage managers became assistant floor managers because we work on the floor, and it became two really important jobs on a production. The first was you had to organise the action props. So for those that are not quite sure what that means, anything that is used or touched by an actor becomes an action prop as opposed to a dressing prop. And so the assistant floor manager had to order it up, make sure it was there on the day. So that was the first part of the job. And of course, the second part of the job was to ensure that all the actors had their calls for the next day and the rest of the schedule. So I can recall spending an awful lot of time in a telephone box, and my pockets weighed down with coins, so that you would be calling the actors, and I do also recall you had to speak to the actor rather than leave a message with somebody. So this was very important, and so hours and hours would be spent in the public telephone box or in the hotel phone. So those two were the main elements of an assistant floor manager's job.
So this wasn't an entry-level job then. You'd been at the BBC at least a couple of years beforehand. So how had you found yourself there?
I worked in an office at the BBC, and my job was a sort of fairly menial job in programme planning. And I can recall at a Christmas party, I got chatting to the boss of the drama department, and sort of complaining that I was making these decisions about studios and resources and departments, and yet I had no idea really what I was talking about because I'd never worked in production. And he said, right, okay, come with me. And so the following Monday I went down to a sandpit in Leatherhead to watch the filming of Blake 7. And I arrived with my office briefcase, and completely out of place, really. I even queued up at the caterers at lunchtime with my £5 note in my hand to pay for my lunch. So that was my very, very first experience of production. And I never went back to the office, really. I realised that I'd rather work in a sandpit anywhere than an office at Television Centre. So I just kept going. I worked from one kind of attachment to another until finally they gave me a job.
So working on something like Doctor Who, which your story had a lot of location and studio work, would it have been a particularly complicated show to work on, and I suppose quite a good training ground for someone fairly early on at the BBC?
I think it was certainly a good training ground. My memory of that early Doctor Who, which was called Stones of Blood, is that it was shot in Buckinghamshire, and I only worked on the location element for some reason. I obviously went on to do something else. But Yeah, I think I was slightly in awe of this huge operation that was going on, and the fact we were staying in a hotel was quite, quite interesting. I'd never done that before uh, at work, and working with actors also. All this was completely brand new. Never experienced it before, but I decided that I was going to do this because it was much more interesting than what I've been doing in an office.
Yeah, I can imagine. And having sort of solely worked on the location side of things, I imagine by the time you're brought on, locations have been found, and you're more sort of with the filming rather than any sort of pre-production side of things. Or would you have come on earlier than that?
Well, yeah. I mean, as you go on, you are assigned bigger projects, and you are. I was very lucky in 1980 because I had applied for a job, and I'd been given this job as an AFM in the drama serials department. And I can remember going up to work on the train and reading a book, a novel, an R.F. Delderfield novel called To Serve All My Days. And just a few days later, I was summoned into the office and told that I'd been assigned to this production called To Serve All My Days. So, I knew this book intimately, and that was my very, very first job as a kind of a staff assistant floor manager at the BBC. And in that particular case, of course, I worked on it from the very, very beginning. So the first thing, obviously there's no director at that point. The first people who arrive in the production office is the production assistant, possibly the production manager. And of course, it's completely different now, but you'd be one of the last to join the production, and you certainly wouldn't run on the whole thing. But now, but then, yes, there was this team of people, the director and the director's team who worked on it from beginning right through to the end. And again, To Serve All My Days was an outside broadcast, effectively. So 80% of it was made in the studio at the television centre, and the remainder was done on location in Dorset, I think, many places, but most importantly a school, Milton Abbas in Dorset. And again, my job, as an AFM, was to provide the action props, to make sure all the actors were there at the right time. And I had a terrible embarrassment on To Serve All My Days, because at the end of the first episode, and if you look at it, you'll see it, there is a kind of flourish where the headmaster, played by Frank Middlemass, is taking the lid off a silver platter, and under the silver platter are delicious buttered toasted tea cakes. And of course, I had to make these in the little room off the Studio 3, and I wasn't very good at cooking. I burnt most of them, and when he took this thing off, they looked the most disgusting things, burnt tea cakes with hardly any butter. But of course, there wasn't time to do a retake, so they're there for posterity. But yeah, that was the first job I did in the summer of 1980, yeah.
So working with the likes of Susan Engel, Beatrix Lehman, Mary Town, Tom Baker, on something like Doctor Who, that must have been not only a great show to learn on, but to be learning in around very experienced actors, and I suppose away on location, so you have perhaps more time to get to know these people.
Yes, and they are kind of, it's a show that's almost on autopilot. They're so experienced, they know exactly what they're doing, and the show, I have no memories of any kind of hiccups at that point. But later on, of course, you get used to it, and it's not quite so glamorous. It's not quite so exciting. But I think when you're there as a kind of as you're almost your first job, I think you're a bit in awe of everything, and not only the artists but the camera crew, and also you're learning what everybody does. And certainly, one of the things I learned there was that if you're running a show, or if you're working on a show, you've got to know everybody's name. You've got to know their first name, and you've got to know what job they do. The most important thing. And of course, as you go up the line, you become a first assistant director, it becomes even more important.
I imagine on location you'd have had quite a bit to do with the director, Darrell Blake, who had not only directed before, but had sort of started with a design background.
Yes, I remember Darrell Blake. Yes, he had a scarf around his neck. He looked like a sort of a college boy, I think. I seem to know, as far as I can remember, he was organised. He knew what he was doing, and he again was working with very experienced actors. And of course, also the schedules were very tight, even probably by today's standards. The amount of days you had to complete. So, directors had to know what they were doing. They had to shoot the minimum amount in order to achieve what they wanted to do. So I remember him being very, very good with the actors, in particular,
Because I suppose perhaps something that is unique to Doctor Who is its following even then, and being on location, that must have been quite something to be dealing with on an early job, a public watching filming it, and I suppose sometimes getting in the way.
Later on, I can remember all kinds of instances where we were filming in all kinds of places, and the public were definitely watching, and as they do today. But I can't particularly remember in Doctor Who it was any. You see, I think the thing is, Doctor Who today has a different kind of fan base to what it might have had in 1978. It was just in 1978, it was just a TV show which the BBC made. It was a kind of routine thing. It wasn't anything special. And I think now that when you look back on it, obviously it's kind of achieved a cult status. And I suppose if you were working on it today, you've got all that history to bear in mind. But when I did it in 1979, and I think I wasn't a particular fan of Doctor Who. I think the last time I'd seen it, it was Patrick Troughton was in it, but it was still, nevertheless, it was still quite a exciting thing to work with people like Tom Baker and Mary Tam. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that your actual first experience of a set was Blake 7, which a couple of years after Doctor Who you found yourself actually working on. Was it quite nice to actually be working on a production that had first excited you about the world of production?
Yes, I was really excited to work on Blake 7 because it was a kind of cult production by then. And also the director, whose name was Vere Lorrimer, I remember, was a very interesting man, and he had an ability to act out all the parts himself. So if he was talking to an actor about how he'd like something he'd do it himself. He'd become that character, and he was a complete extrovert. And also in those days, these programs were made primarily in the studio. As I said, you'd go to a sandpit somewhere for a few minutes of insert filming. So the whole studio setup, as it was when I did 7 of My Days, was a number of days in a rehearsal room at the television rehearsal rooms in North Acton, and you'd spend your most of the time there. One of the other job that an assistant floor manager would do is to mark up the floor. I don't know how much you know about that, but basically you'd have plans of the sets, and you would have different coloured tape, and you would have to mark up in precise terms the set on the floor, but it will be in coloured tape. The other thing you'd have to do would get the furniture from the basement of the rehearsal rooms and put the furniture in. So essentially the actors had a replica of the set they'd be working with in the studio. And they would spend these days rehearsing parts until it came to the day of the final run through. And then it came to the day of the technical run. And then the very last thing that would happen would be the producer's run. And you'd run the whole thing from the beginning to the end. Even the location inserts would all be done. The whole thing would be run. And I can remember standing there in the rehearsal room with all these people, all these very, very, my eyes, quite highly paid people. And I would be there running the thing, really, with the book and the sound effect machine, which would have telephone rings and doorbells on it. And thinking, God, this is a really responsible job I'm doing here, and the thing had to work. And then after the producer's run, there'd be notes from the writer and changes made, and then that would be a lot. The next time you saw everybody would be either in the studio or on location, depending on what was happening first.
And then another production that I think certainly now is seen as iconic is House of Cards, which I know you're particularly involved in the first series of that.
Yeah.
At the time, was there a sense that it was going to be a particularly special and gritty production? Because of course, let's say it still stands up very well today for its sort of political intrigue.
Yes, I don't think there was any sign of that at the time we made it. I think the things that have made it kind of memorable have been the cast, of course, Ian Richardson, his asides to the camera, created by, I think, Andrew Davies, was it? On the Michael Dobbs wrote the original novel. Andrew Davies wrote the screenplay. And of course, the key thing was the timing of it. So we made it, we didn't know, of course, we didn't know what was going to happen, did we, politically? And the fact is it came out just at the time that Margaret Thatcher, I think, was fighting for her office. And it came out at the time when comments that were in the show were related on the doorstep of number 10 Downing Street, So I think that that's why it's memorable. And apart from the fact, also, Paul Seed, the director, did a fantastic job, and he made a show which had a great cast, fantastic music as far as I can remember. And Paul Seed is a director who knows exactly what he's doing and works with the actors. The actors love Paul Seed, and he made a fantastic show. And I think he was an actor himself. So he did very well.
The joy of the BBC at the time was that you could be across so many different departments and genres. Did you have a particular preference as to the types of shows you worked on? Because looking at your work, it's mainly dramas. There's no sort of comedies or sitcoms. Was that a deliberate choice?
Drama was the thing I loved to work on. But I worked for a lot of my career in drama serials. That's kind of some of those shows you've been talking about. But I was always slightly frustrated that although we spent up to a year sometimes working on one, they went out, they were over in 6 weeks, and sometimes the audience ratings were quite poor compared with what other shows were. So I made a decision to move into drama series. And in doing so, I became involved in Eastenders and some of the other shows that were getting huge ratings. So I wanted to have an experience of these kind of popular shows and the sort of the soaps, and ensure that I didn't just kind of work on the drama serials.
Because by the time you were producing things like Eastenders, which you'd worked on previously as I think production manager, you say you're across the whole series rather than odd episodes. Are you sort of able to make it your own to some extent? Because of course, EastEnders by that point was an established success, but I imagine you have your own idea of sort of things it could do and directions it could go in.
Yeah, so I worked on some individual episodes quite early on, and I was a kind of production manager. I then remember when I moved from a very, very high-profile production, I think it was something like The Buccaneers, which was almost all film, and we were shooting as you do on film, like we were doing 3 or 4 minutes a day, and I went immediately from that to work on EastEnders as the first assistant director for a lovely director, Bill Sellars. And we'd set the shot up on the backlot of EastEnders, and I shouted action, and we came to the end of it, and Bill Sellars said, right, move on. And I was used to doing 16 takes, and nothing was ready because, we knew it would be 20, 30 minutes before we'd move on. So it was that kind of pace of work that was the surprising difference between, drama serials and the soaps. But later on, I really was head of production at EastEnders. I worked with the executive producer, on those shows. And it became really, head of production was a job which was to do with personnel, people, and logistics. Not so much about the direction of the show, because the direction of these shows are decided by the controllers of the networks and the executive producers. What I do is I respond to their direction. And when I first got the job on Eastenders as head of production, I was told, we need to tell you that we're going to 4 times a week. So I had no idea that was coming. I hadn't read about it. And of course, you can imagine that the logistics of moving a show like that from 3 times a week to 4 times a week might sound quite simple from a layman's point of view. But when you know what's involved, it's a huge logistical exercise of schedules and money and everything. So those are the kind of things as when you're in charge of a show like that, you're involved in. Yeah.
And as you say, you'd encounter that show as a number of different roles, but as the head of production, it must have been a particularly good sort of learning ground, because as you say, a soap is almost a machine, but let alone adding another episode a week. That must have been a great learning curve, even in that more senior position.
Yes, because you've never done it before, really, and also you're thinking at the same time, we could be able to do 5 a week. This might not be the end of it. We might need to increase it again. So it's never been done before. And as you know, EastEnders started at 2 a week. So you've got nothing really to follow. You've not got no guide. You just have to talk to the head of the script department. You have to talk to each individual department and find out what's involved for them. And what's the new schedule going to be? But I think the thing you have to remember is the key things on those huge machines are the writers. Can you write it? Who's going to write it? Can you write it fast enough? And can the actors cope with the demands of the show? Because generally speaking, although from an audience point of view, it looks as though there's lots of actors doing different things, it falls to a key set of actors, usually the key storylines. And if you've now got to do 4 a week instead of 3 a week, then they're going to have to work longer and harder. And what you don't want is them to fall over. So you have to kind of find a system that works so they get some time off. I can't remember anything particularly going wrong. We just kind of switched to this. We switched from this schedule. And of course, as you know, it's made about 6 weeks ahead. So, it's kind of bedded in before the audience actually get the extra episode a week. But no, I think it just kind of happened, and we just kind of fell in with it.
Yes, certainly, and still something that happens today. It's not gone back to fewer episodes. But I imagine you would have had similar pressures and demands for something like the bill as well, because again, there's a lot of episodes a week.
Yes. So the bill was a very ambitious, very exciting time. The last major production that I worked on from about 2006 to 2010, and that was started off as I think it's 2 episodes. Where it started off as Wooden Top, but it became 2 episodes a week, and it changed entirely in the time that I was there. I think it was the show that I remember for being absolutely perfect in terms of a show that was running. There were other shows, about Casualty and Holby City, and these are the shows I was responsible for, but at the BBC. But the bill ran on clockwork. Everybody knew exactly what they were doing. Most people had been there a very long time. And it just ran beautifully, and they could cope with anything that came along. If there was an accident, we would just deal with it, and it was just the most incredibly organised show. And I took over. It was already organised. Donna Whiffen was the head of production, and she'd done a fantastic job. And I took over, and it just ran beautifully. But unfortunately, by the time I got there, it was already running into the recession of 2008. and ITV were running out of money, and the bill was a very expensive show for ITV, and we tried to reinvent it so that it would be a much more filmic, a much more hard-hitting show. Well, not a soap, but a real hard-hitting police series. But nothing really could save it because it was ITV had run out of money, and it was just something they had to cut. So my last job was unfortunate to make everybody redundant.
Yes, but still a series that is greatly loved and remembered and repeated. But as you say, it must have been quite a sort of strange atmosphere in those sort of last couple of months as the production wound down.
Yeah, it was an announcement in the canteen on the Bill set by Lorraine Hegacy, who was the head of Talkback Thames. She came in one morning. I think, to be honest, most people knew what, the rumours had started. Most people knew what was going to happen. But she announced that the bill would close and this would be the date, and people were crying and very, very emotional. And I remember that. And the rest was really just logistics, was how to run it down, how to sell the studios off, and all the rest of it. But all good things have to come to an end, don't they, sometimes?
Yes, sadly. But was the bill, you should say, perfectly, in the way it worked, it could respond to anything. Was the bill perhaps one of the most sort of standout jobs that you worked on, or do other shows perhaps, particularly jump to mind as the most happy or challenging or smoothest?
Well, the one thing I can tell you is that when it comes to happy shows generally don't succeed. Happy shows are the ones that kind of disappear without a trace. The shows that cause the most aggravation and are the hardest and the most difficult and the most emotional, those are the ones that usually become great successful shows and are, so you can't kind of coast along. It's a huge, it's the creative versus the logistics. It's getting all that to mesh, and to, the ones that go hugely over budget very often are successful, but they may not be made again, So a lot of my job was to keep shows on budget, and you have to have very interesting conversations with people about how to reduce the ambition sometimes. But what you never say is no, and you can't do that. You always find a way of saying, that's a fantastic idea, that's going to be absolutely incredible, well done, but I'll tell you what, rather than that, we might do that, because we're never going to be able to manage to do that one. So I do remember, generally speaking, the shows that were the hardest to make logistically were the ones that stood out, such as the Buccaneers, and also Tom Jones was quite hard as well, because we got miles behind the schedule and completely over budget, and we were filming at Ealing Film Studios, and we were there for a long time, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And as the show went on, we were getting further and further behind my schedule, until it came to a point where we had to put our hand up and say, look, we're not going to finish, and ask the studio for another week. The studio said no, because we've got a big feature film coming in. So there was a huge, great debate. The head of drama, Michael Waring, came to Ealing Studios, and we had a meeting, and he said, we've spent enough effing money on this show, we might as well spend another $500,000. So we moved the whole set out of Ealing and into Shepperton, where it was rebuilt in situ, and we did another week. But it was, I suppose, logistically a bit of an unmitigated financial disaster.
So what would have been perhaps one of the happy shows you worked on, even if it perhaps wasn't a long-running series?
Well, you've mentioned one of them actually in your introduction, which would be a show that nobody's ever heard of, called Squadron. Because the idea of Joe Waters, who was the producer, was to make a series about the kind of the RAF, but it was a rapid deployment squadron. So it was some aircraft and a section that would move to any trouble point in the world, and it was a story about the pilots' wives, the management, and so on. But unfortunately, it was made in about 1982. And the other important thing that happened in 1982 was the Falklands War. So when we finally arrived at RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, all our aircraft had flown off. And I can remember Joe Waters stamping his foot, shouting, "Where are my aircraft?" And we had to, I think we made some models, or there were some special effects to replicate these aircraft. But that was particularly, I mean, obviously filming first time I'd ever been to Cyprus, and working with a fantastic crew. And also a RAF advisor was with us the whole time. And I forget his name, but he did cause a bomb alert when he left his briefcase in the canteen at RAF Akrotiri, and the whole place was evacuated. And for Squadron, you can't even, I don't think it's even available on a DVD, so I've not been able to see it since it went out. But that was one that was memorable.
Well, hopefully one day we shall be able to enjoy it, and maybe it will become a much better remembered series, because it certainly sounds like it's a happy one to work on. Which I think is a lovely note to end on. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, Nigel. It's been great to just talk to you a little bit about some of your work. I know there's an awful lot more we could talk about, so thank you.
Very good to reminisce. Thank you very much.